2 years after she was arrested and charged with 22 counts of molesting children, Tonya Craft steels herself for the verdict.
The judge handed it to the individual in that particular courthouse that read the verdicts. And he started with count number 1.
We, the jury, find the defendant. Count number 1, not guilty.
21 more times she heard those words.
Count number 5, not guilty. 8, not guilty. Count 12, count 16. Count number 20, not guilty.
Whenever they read count 22, not guilty, I about passed out.
Count number 22, not guilty.
My body just, with everything that I had been working on and had been hoping and praying for, and my attorney, one of my attorneys, Scott, was next to me and actually, grabbed me, and then we left the courtroom. I felt the same shock and disbelief that I felt when they showed up at my door approximately 2 years before. It was just, I couldn't believe it because I had prepared myself for the worst.
Tonya was free, but there was collateral damage.
Everybody was just overjoyed, and I was overjoyed to a point. But without my children, they could have locked me up forever.
It had been 2 long years since she had seen her own daughter, the same daughter who had testified against her.
What was that reunion like for you?
It was bittersweet because I knew that my daughter had been told things that weren't true. I knew that there was a light in her that needed to be kind of rekindled, but it wasn't going to be done in one sitting. And it was supervised, so there was a therapist involved. It was a very therapeutic setting. I just sat on the couch and I cried when I saw her, and she brought me a tissue, but she sat kind of across the room and we just talked. And I just asked about school and, just as normal of a conversation as we could have. And I knew that I wanted to go up and hug her and pick her up and run out of the room and take her home and never let go. But 1, I knew that couldn't happen, and 2, I had to let her come to me and let her feel safe and comfortable and let her heal in the way she needed to.
Tonya didn't go back to teaching. Instead, she wrote a book about her personal nightmare called Accused. The former kindergarten teacher actually went back to school herself, law school. Ironically, she now works for the prosecutor's office in Chattanooga, Tennessee. But the most important thing in Tonya Craft's life today is what it's always been, her children. And we're happy to report they are back with their mom.
And we do want to stress that we actually reached out to the prosecutor's office here. Sandra Lamb and the father of the other alleged victim all have declined to comment or have simply not returned our calls. Well, here now with me to talk about both sides of the law on a very difficult case like this one is former prosecutor Lonnie Coombs and also criminal defence lawyer Mike Cavaluzzi. Guys, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
I talk about it being a difficult case, Lonnie. It most certainly is, and it's had devastating consequences for so many people involved. Yes. The question I want to ask you, how did they even pursue this case? How did it make it to trial?
Well, remember at the time they filed the charges, what evidence did they have? They had not 1 little girl, not 2 little girls, but 3 little girls come forward and say that they had been touched inappropriately. Then we have law enforcement, the detectives who talked to them who believed it. We have child advocates who worked with them who believed what they said. So it wasn't just 1 or 2, disgruntled parents. It was all of these different people who heard the information and believed that there was enough evidence there to go forward with the case.
Do you agree with that, Mike?
Look, not only was Tonya Craft found not guilty of these charges, she was exonerated, and the allegations against her were found to be baseless and false. So no, the charges should never have been filed. So when Lonnie says we have 3 accusers, these 3 little girls making these allegations, she needs to also remember that each of those 3 little girls, when first asked about whether they had been inappropriately touched, all said no.
Well, as Mike knows, when you're working with children this young, you're talking about 4, 5, 6 years old. That's not even like an 8, 9, or 10-year-old. You're talking about very young children. And when people are having to interview them and get very difficult information out, sometimes it takes some time for them to build up rapport and be able to talk to them.
But in the court of public opinion, people who have looked closely at the case, I don't think anyone challenges a conclusion, including you, Lonnie. I don't think anyone challenges the conclusion that Tonya Craft did not commit these crimes.
Now, though, just to briefly interrupt, when you break this down, when you step back and you look at what happened here, the question becomes, how do they be held to account for making these false allegations? Is it civilly that you have to look at some sort of avenue of recourse here?
Tonya Craft filed a multi-million-dollar civil lawsuit in federal court naming virtually everyone involved in the investigation, as rightfully she should have done. This is a lesson that we should have learned in famous cases out of Kern County, out of Washington, and the McMartin case, and we don't learn the lesson. And so when Lonnie refers to these 3 girls and they're simply telling these stories, the lesson we need to learn, Lonnie, is that children are easily suggestible. They should not be so immediately believed because they are so easily suggested. There are famous studies about how easy it is to lead a child from the truth right into a lie.
Lonnie Coombs, Mike Cavaluzzi, thank you so much for your insight today.
Thank you.
Thank you.